What is up, everyone? Hope you're all doing well, and welcome back to Fill of the Week. We are now at week number 8, and you can see this week I have a little bit of a bigger setup going on than last week. The reason for this is I'll be recording an album this week. The guy who wanted me to record the drums came over here. We tried a bunch of cymbals, and got together to decide what kind of setup we'd be using, what kind of sounds we're going for, and eventually we arrived at this pretty big setup. So 2 rack toms, 2 floor toms, 2 snares, hi-hat, stack, splash, crash, ride, China. There's a ton of stuff here right now. And I'm really enjoying it, so I wanted to film today's lesson while I'm playing on this bigger kit. We'll see how long I keep it for, but it is a lot of fun. So anyway, let us dive into today's lesson, featuring this a little bit bigger setup than last week. So this week we have a request from Harry Latter, who was curious about different ways of using a pataflafla in a fill. And the pataflafla is a rudiment. It's a pretty weird name for rudiment. It's one you don't hear a lot about, but it is basically the sticking is just flam, right, left, flam. So you loop that around, you get flam, right, left, flam, right, left, flam. And I experimented a little bit with this. I have to be honest, I've never used this rudiment before. So that was a new thing for me to actually, mess around a little bit with that and see what I could come up with. Eventually, I arrived at this fill that I want to share with you guys right now. So I'll just break it down, play it slow, medium, fast, play it in a groove, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. Hope you can learn it and have some fun with it as well. So let us dive in. It's funny how it's almost distracting having so much stuff on the kit. I mean, I know this is not a huge setup. I mean, some of you guys probably have way bigger setups than this, but I mean, coming from the setup I had last week to this, it's like that kind of move is always a bit of a shock. So now I was like, oh shit, I have so many toys, so many sounds, so many things to play on. So yeah, now I want to give you guys 2 little tips to keep in mind as you're practicing this fill. And the first thing would be that it's pretty easy to tense up during a fill like this. We had a similar experience with the Swiss triplet fill I did, I think week 5 or something. You guys can go back and check that, 000.com/fill of the week if you haven't watched the old lessons. We had a similar thing there where it's like there's so many strokes, or that rather doing the flams like we're doing here makes it so that you're playing 3 strokes in a row a lot of times with each hand, and it kind of interweaving that with each other. So playing 3 loud strokes, or even 2 loud and 1 soft, or whatever you're doing that repeatedly with both hands kind of causes your arms to choke up and tensen up a little bit. So try to keep a relaxed grip, try to kind of stay loose in your forearms and kind of be relaxed, and more like use the motion of moving your arms as kind of the power you get from your stroke, instead of like moving over and then hitting and like being robotic. Try to use that natural movement of going back and forth to your advantage. So yeah, that would be tip number 1. Try to stay loose as always. This is always important, of course, but this particular fill you might notice as you're practicing it is pretty easy to tense up. And then the second tip I want to give you has to do with timing, and this is very important when playing fills that involves flams, because something I noticed happens a lot for me. I don't know if you guys are the same, let me know in the comments, but what happens for me a lot when I'm playing flams is the whole fill tends to be oftentimes a little bit dragged out, a little bit slower tempo than the groove I was playing before or after or whatever. And I've realized why that keeps happening for me when there's a lot of flams in the fills. And the reason is, if you think about it, like a flam is basically 2 strokes right next to each other, right? So you have 2 different strokes, which you could put the listening emphasis on, and you could decide basically one of those, like you want one of those 2 strokes to be on the actual downbeat, or on the subdivision that you're trying to hit. So one of those strokes is going to be in time, and the other one is going to be right before it. And if you're not conscious and if you're not self-aware of which one of those strokes you actually let land on the timing, that's gonna really mess up the entire timing and make it a bit stretched out for the fill as a whole. So as an example, let's say you're playing this fill that I just showed you guys, right? And you're putting your listening emphasis and your timing focus on the right hand stroke, so the one that hits the rack tom. So you're letting that stroke land on the downbeats. If you think about that as you're playing it, but maybe there's a disconnect. So as you're listening to the whole thing, your mind listens for the timing as where the snare stroke lands. So basically, you're gonna start counting the next subdivision from where the snare stroke lands, but your body is actually focusing on the rack tom stroke. So there's going to be a disconnect and an ever so slight delay in timing between what you're playing and what you're hearing, causing you to wait a little longer or maybe wait a little shorter before your next flam. And that's going to make the whole thing kind of a little bit dragged out in either way. Sometimes you speed it up, and sometimes, at least what happens for me a lot, is that the fill gets dragged out and ends up being at a little bit slower tempo than the groove itself. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit hard to explain this, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. So my tip for this would be really pay attention to which one of the strokes in the flam that you let be the guiding stroke, the timing stroke. So what I'm trying to do is, as I'm playing flams, I'm always trying to focus and letting the snare stroke on my left hand, I'm trying to let that be the determining stroke for where the timing is, and my right hand ever so slightly before that. And I try to align that with the grid and with the subdivision and counting in my head and making sure that everything lands nice and even in an evenly spread out bar. But it is a tricky thing to do if you're not paying attention to it. So as you're practicing this fill or any fill that involves flams, pay attention to your timing. Even better, practice to a metronome and you will really hear when there's a disconnect going on. But either way, try to just pay a little bit of attention to that. It really pays off when you get the whole thing together and you know exactly which strokes you're letting determine the lead and determine the timing. Alright, so that will be everything for this week. Hope you guys enjoyed this lesson, and as always, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you go to the comment section below, leaving me a comment about what type of fill you would want to see me break down next week. That could be, hey, what is the drummer doing at 4 minutes and 5 seconds into this song? Like, what's the fill he's playing there? Or maybe it could be a specific genre, like, hey, could you break down a rock fill or a jazz fill or something involving a rudiment like today? Whatever request you have, let me know in the comments below, and I will look at all of that for next week. Also, keep an eye on your email. I got an email coming your guys' way in a couple of days that will involve some tips surrounding gigging. So keep an eye out for that, and I will see you guys very soon. Hope you enjoyed the lesson, and take care. See ya!